and welcome to Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week, we invite you to send in your questions, your curiosities, things you're interested in learning more about, and we'll explore the fascinating history of the city of Mississauga together. Thank you, David, for another question here on Ask a Historian. And it's not an easy one to answer in terms of a total number of casualties. And it might sound evasive, but let me explain myself a little bit. We are constantly documenting the soldiers who served and fell from historic Mississauga. And just the term historic Mississauga might give you a clue as to why it's difficult to come up with a conclusive answer to your question. Historically, there was no singular list of names for those who served and fell from Mississauga. As you likely know, Mississauga was born through amalgamation. During most of the major conflicts in Canadian history, Mississauga was a series of villages and hamlets, only joined together through a series of amalgamations beginning again in 1968. Each of those hamlets and villages had their own histories, their own stories, their own connections to military service. Most of the memorials, remembrances, honor rolls, and cenotaphs or war memorials that are located in our city predate the existence of the city of Mississauga. They connect to one of these historic cores, and in some cases very specifically to a congregation or a community organization or even a school. So there's no singular list. One of the challenges and one of the exciting projects we've had ongoing for a number of years now is trying to document all of those individuals whose names appear in a variety of capacities throughout our city. Again, whether they're honor rolls or remembrances, stained glass windows, road and street names, cemetery remembrances on family gravestones, cenotaph names, etc. There are so many different ways in which those who fell were remembered within our community. And of course, part of the challenge is not everyone who served and fell was remembered, and so that becomes part of the challenge as well. So creating a list, although we do have a list, it is a working list, and quite happy to share that with you, but it is not an exact science. There are challenges therein. So when we look at the kind of the history of those who fell, most people will connect to the stories of the First and Second World War for obvious reasons. But the first of our fallen from historic Mississauga was a 17-year-old boy who died of illness while on militia duty during the War of 1812. His name was Private Cornelius Oliver Thomson, and he passed away on June 4th of 1813. He's buried down in the Niagara area, although without a gravestone, so we're not positive exactly where he is laid to rest. And sadly, our most recent fallen within our community was on March 8th of 2009, and that was 22-year-old Trooper Mark Hani Diab in Afghanistan. And so we have a long connection within our community to military service and to the stories of those who fell. At Heritage Mississauga, over many years now, we've explored numerous past conflicts. It's not we haven't reached the end of that process. We're still in the process of constantly looking and revising and connecting to those who served from our community historically. We've looked at the War of 1812, Rebellion of 1837, partially into the American Civil War, although there's more work to be done there because Canadians did indeed serve in the American Civil War, and we do have a fallen from our community. Dr. Charles Mitchell Jr. Passed away in 1864 in Florida, serving as a surgeon during the American Civil War, and he was buried just outside of Fort Jefferson in the Florida Keys. The Fenian Raids of 1866, the Red River Rebellion, the Northwest Rebellion, the Second Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, Afghanistan, and peacekeeping missions throughout the world. All of them had fallen soldiers attached to them. Many of them we have Mississauga connections to. Not all, but many. And so over that breadth of our research, and again, it is not a finished product, but over that breadth of the research, we have identified 189 individuals with name connections to historic Mississauga. We can fairly confidently say that approximately 10 of them did not reside here during their lifetime, and that their families later came to Mississauga and added their names to memorials in the years that followed those various conflicts. And so we can say from the information that we have, approximately 178 to 180 individuals from this community served and fell overseas and or elsewhere, not always overseas, but elsewhere during times of war. And so again, it's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes it's hard to determine where they lived, how their names appeared. There are misspellings. There are individuals who have multiple commemorations within our community, and some, for whatever reason, do not have any commemorations that we've identified. And so the work is ongoing at all times, but we have organized or collected a significant amount of material, and there's been lots of hands contributing to this project over time, of those that are seeking to honor and commemorate individuals who served within our community. If you want to touch on just even service during the First World War, connect with the museums of Mississauga. There's an ongoing Our Boys exhibit down at the Bradley Museum, connecting to those who served and fell during the First World War. And so again, we have when you look at some of the significant conflicts over our history in terms of just the sheer number of fallen, the First and Second World War obviously come to the forefront. Mississauga had between 94 and 96 fallen in the First World War, and in the Second World War so far we have documented 81 fallen from historic Mississauga during the Second World War. And each one of those names, when you see them on a list, is sometimes you get lost in the story that this is a name. We have to keep in perspective that these are lives of individuals who have come to an end. The vast majority of them were young. The vast majority of them were unmarried. Most of them did not have children that were left behind. So they're ends of stories, if you will. The average age of our fallen throughout all of our conflicts is 24 years old. And so again, you look at, this is the youth of a community over time, and what would the impact that they would have had on the community going forward. I mean, we can guess, but we will never know. I'm drawn to the story of Lieutenant Colonel Alex Thomson, after whom the Port Credit Legion is named, and upon his passing, the epitaph was "No finer son of Peel existed." And so each one of these things are incredible stories. Bravery, sacrifice, heartrending loss within our community, the families that were left behind, and the loved ones, etc. And we keep that in perspective when we look at it's hard to see it beyond statistics sometime, but again, these are lives within our community. Sons and daughters of Mississauga, many of whom, again, not all, but many of whom are remembered in various cenotaphs, war memorials, honor rolls, commemorative plaques, service lists, etc., and a variety of other remembrances. That many of them have their final resting places far from home. Our war dead are buried in England, in Scotland, in Belgium, France, Holland, Germany, Russia, Italy, Sicily, Egypt, India, Burma, and Niagara in the United States, and even one on a lost cemetery island in the Florida Keys, which is no longer, that passed away again during the American Civil War. So for those who served and fell, and for those who served and returned home, to help shape this place, we thank you for your service, and we will remember. Hi, Duncan, and thank you for your question here on Ask a Historian. And yes, indeed, there are names within our community that carry the names of veterans, that are places that are named in honor of those who served, and some of whom fell in our history. A couple of our legions are named in honor of past veterans of service. One in particular I wanted to draw attention to. Again, we could go through a list, but I think rather we'll tell the story of one. And that is a name that is carried on a recreational trail in the Applewood area, and that is the Charlie Martin Trail. And Charlie Martin is it's a fascinating story, and you're welcome to read more about it. There's he published a book called Battle Diary, and we'll show a picture of it here as well. But Charles Cromwell Martin was born on December 18th of 1918 in Wales. During the Second World War, Charlie was a warrant officer, and he was awarded both the Distinguished Conduct Medal and the Military Medal. His book, called Battle Diary, was published in 1994, and it's a fabulous read of his experiences through the Second World War. Charlie came to Canada with his family in 1928, and he settled in the Cooksville area. Charlie attended Port Credit High School, and the family ran a dairy farm prior to his enlistment. Charlie joined the Queen's Own Rifles in June of 1940, and after a month, just a month later, the unit was mobilized for service in the Second World War. In July of 1941, Charlie departed for Europe as part of the 8th Infantry Brigade of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. Charlie was promoted to corporal in 1942 and a sergeant in 1943. He also met his wife-to-be overseas. She was a member of the Auxiliary Territorial Service as a radar operator in Sussex, and they were married on October 30th of 1943. In February of 1944, Charlie, at the young age of 24, Charlie was promoted to warrant officer and appointed the company sergeant major for A Company of the Queen's Own Rifles. A and B companies of the Queen's Own Rifles were part of the first assault wave of the 3rd Canadian Division, landing at Juno Beach on D-Day, June 6 of 1944. So a lot of Charlie's remembrances recounted in Battle Diary were of the Normandy landings during D-Day and the Juno Beach invasion. Once the landing craft beached and their ramps dropped open at Juno Beach, heavy machine gun fire and mortar fire opened up on the Canadians as they raced to shore, scaling the seawall. And within minutes, dozens of Canadians were killed or wounded, but Charlie and his men of the Queen's Own Rifles, despite suffering almost 50% casualties, carried on and captured their objective. In November of 1944, Charlie was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his utter disregard of personal safety, which had, upon many occasions, been the means for saving the lives of many of his men, and that's a quote. While his leadership ability was the means for the success of many actions undertaken by his company since D-Day, Charlie later also received the military medal for personally leading his men in a daring charge at the enemy in the Hochwald Forest in Germany on March 4th of 1945, and I quote, in a magnificent example of courage, coolness in action, ability to inspire men, and devotion to duty. Charlie was seriously wounded in action on April 16th of 1945 near the northern Dutch town of Sneek. He was evacuated to Belgium, then to England, and eventually sent home to Canada to recover. Only 3 weeks later, after Charlie was wounded, Germany surrendered and the war in Europe was officially over. Charlie had returned to Canada in August of 1945 to be joined by his bride in April of 1946. He started a job with the Ontario Department of Agriculture shortly afterwards, and in 1949, he purchased a small parcel of land not far from where he grew up, right here in what is now Mississauga. He and his wife operated a post office and a general store, and he continued with his government agricultural job. Charlie helped his comrades from the war and their families reintegrate into the community. He was active in his community, serving as a school trustee, a Boy Scouts leader, and a Sunday school supervisor. He also helped to raise money for the building of Dixie Arena and for the Mississauga Hospital. For the 50th anniversary of D-Day in 1994, Charlie wrote a memoir about his experiences, and particularly focusing on the Normandy campaign, and with a promise of more to come as part of a storytelling. But at the insistence of others, and including Roy Whitsed, a full-length book was produced by Charlie entitled Battle Diary, from D-Day in Normandy to the Zuiderzee and VE. In 1994, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, produced a one-hour documentary titled Battle Diary, A Day in the Life of Charlie Martin, which combined interviews, archival film, and diary excerpts to relate Martin's experiences on D-Day and in the Second World War. although the story itself focuses a lot on Charlie's activities and involvement in it, it really is a story of a Canadian soldier through the harrowing days of the D-Day invasions of Normandy and of the tail end of the Second World War. Charlie died in Mississauga on October 13th of 1997. In honor of his wartime service and post-war community work, Mississauga, the city, named the Charlie Martin Trail after him. It's a multi-use, all-season trail, and it recognizes Charlie's wartime service and post-war commitment to his community. A lot of the information we have here is courtesy of the Canadian Encyclopedia.ca, who has a biography on Charlie online, courtesy of John Boileau. And again, Battle Diary, the book, is a fabulous read on an average citizen, everyday citizen here from Mississauga, who stepped forward to do his duty during the Second World War and recount those incredible moments in our world history from a very local perspective. So again, Duncan, thank you for your question, and hopefully you have a chance to get out and explore the Charlie Martin Trail and kind of reflect on the life of a soldier. Our last part this week on Ask a Historian is a callback to a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about the oldest cenotaph in Mississauga down in Port Credit. I made reference then that a few weeks later we would talk about the second oldest one, and so here we are. The second oldest cenotaph in Mississauga is in Streetsville, albeit it's less than a year after the Port Credit Cenotaph was unveiled. There's a little bit of a community fun story there of whose is older. Streetsville started the fundraising campaign on their end prior to Port Credit, but Port Credit got their cenotaph built before. The Streetsville Cenotaph, or what is officially known, or was officially known as the Streetsville Great War Overseas Veterans Memorial, was unveiled on Dominion Day, now Canada Day, on July 1st of 1926, and it is the second oldest cenotaph in the city of Mississauga. The chosen location for the cenotaph was at the intersection of Queen Street and Main Street due to its previous use as a fairground, a bandshell, and as a place for community gatherings. The cenotaph was relocated slightly in 2013 when they did a redesign of the Streetsville Village Square. The Streetsville Overseas Veterans Club, headed by their president, Captain Reverend Frank Vipond, were inspired to create the War Memorial back in the early 1920s after viewing a miniature brick cenotaph set up in the store window of a Streetsville merchant by the name of Fred Moss. The miniature War Memorial in the store window was of a brick design, a small brick column, and the brick was supplied by the Milton Press Brick Company, who would also go on to supply the brick for the large-scale memorial that would be created a year later. Samuel S. Finley, who was a summer resident in Streetsville and was the head of the art department of the Riverdale Technical School, provided the preliminary designs for the full-scale monument that would be created. The idea of using brick as a material for a war memorial was unique at the time. The design was also unique. They did not follow the kind of accepted design outlines put forward by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Creating the War Memorial was a group effort, and many of the materials and the work was donated, and the funds were raised from the community through the Streetsville Overseas Memorial Fund at the time. So a true community effort in terms of raising the money and the material for building the cenotaph in Streetsville. In 1947, the names of 8 Streetsville residents who passed away in the Second World War were added to the War Memorial. And in 1983, the War Memorial was designated under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act as a historically significant monument. The War Memorial, or the Streetsville Cenotaph again, was restored and relocated slightly eastward of its original position in 2013 as part of a redesign of the Streetsville Village Square. And for anyone looking to read more, there's a wonderful little publication here from the Streetsville Historical Society. It's called The Streetsville Cenotaph, a Village Memorial. Again, this little book here is available through the Streetsville Historical Society at the Leslie Log House, but truly the Streetsville Cenotaph Cenotaph, or again, the Streetsville Great War Overseas Veterans Memorial, is truly one of the focal points of remembrance in our city each and every year. Thank you.